Welcome to Indiana University East and the Kelley School of Business Futurecast for 2024. I'm Denise Smith, Dean of the School of Business and Economics, and I'll be your moderator this morning. The campus is honored to have hosted this event for over 30 years and to provide this insightful information to our community. I have the honor today to introduce our new Chancellor, Dr. Dennis Rome, to personally welcome you all today. Chancellor Rome, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean, for that introduction. Welcome. Good morning. I asked our friends in the cheap seats what's wrong with our first class seating, and they were afraid that people would bother the back of them, and I said there's a larger opportunity back there, so come on down to the front. It's such an honor to serve as the 7th chancellor here. This is homecoming of sorts. I was assistant professor IU Bloomington for 12 years, was promoted there to associate professor. When I arrived in '93, the reputation of the Kelley School of Business was there already. Here was 26 or 27 eons ago, it seems. And I knew of the reputation there. I'm a sociologist by training, and everyone knows that economists and sociologists are best friends. But it's important to understand our finances on a micro level, how it relates to the region, the state, the country, the world. Our country is becoming, our world is becoming smaller because of the innovations in terms of economics and so on. So I wish that the room was full with all of our students to be exposed to how the economy works on those different levels is very valuable. Growing up, I grew up in inner city Chicago. I'm first generation. And the only finance talk we had at our table was that we're still broke, pretty much. I didn't have any financial literacy. And so when I became empowered to teach, I began by teaching intro to social issues, sociology, and so on. I used to include a section in my intro courses on financial literacy. It's so important for students to learn early on how money works throughout not just their families, communities, the state, the nation, the world. We are very privileged to have such an entity as part of IU Central. We can lean on the school with all the resources, the old cliche about to whom much is given, much is expected. So we're expecting a wealth of pithy information, knowledge regarding our economy. And I can't wait to find out whether or not I'm still broke or not, right? Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here during this special week for me. It really isn't about me. It's about the fine work that students, faculty, and staff are doing here at this great institution. So I welcome you, and I thank you for coming out this morning. Thanks to our distinguished panel, which will be introduced in a moment. Again, thank you so much, and welcome.
Thank you, Chancellor Rome. We're happy to have you here. Also attending today, we have several faculty members from the School of Business and Economics. You can wave, stand up. So, this morning you'll be hearing remarks regarding national and international business, financial markets, the outlook for the state of Indiana, as well as the local business and economic report. Following these offerings, the panelists will take questions. Please raise your hand and a microphone will be brought to you. I'd now like to introduce our esteemed panelists. Kyle Anderson. Dr. Anderson is a clinical assistant professor of business economics at the Kelley School of Business in Indianapolis. He earned an MBA and a PhD from the Kelley School of Business in Bloomington. Russell Rhodes. Russell Rhodes is an associate clinical professor of financial management with the Kelley School of Business in Indianapolis. He earned an MS in finance from the University of Memphis and a PhD from Oklahoma State University. Carol Rogers. As director of the Indiana Business Research Center, she is helping the IBRC move into its second century of service to Indiana, which since 1925 has persistently and imaginatively studied the economy and people of the state, sharing its insights and data in ways that can be used in people's everyday work or their grand strategies. IBRC's many publications and websites have tens of thousands of users and have won both accolades and awards. Oi-Lin Chung. Dr. Chung is a professor of finance at Indiana University East. She earned an MS and a PhD in financial economics from the University of New Orleans in Louisiana, and an MBA from the University of Macau, China. She is currently the director of the IU East Business and Economic Research Center. Welcome, panelists, and thank you for being with us this morning. I'll now turn this over to our panel for their valuable insights. And again, there will be time for questions following all the panelists' presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start with the sort of the U.S. outlook. I hope that we've been called a very esteemed panel and asked to give pithy remarks, and I feel like that's a lot to live up to at this point in the morning, but we'll do our best to give it a shot. A year ago, we were here, we presented our forecast, and it was really quite tepid at the time. We kind of gave this duality. We hedged our bets about what the economy might look at like, because we're envisioning somewhere between modest growth and the potential for a recession. And we weren't alone in our sort of negative skew of the economic environment at the time. A year ago, Bloomberg put out a headline that their economic models presented a 100% chance of a recession within the next 12 months. Well, those 12 months have come and gone, and that recession did not materialize, and it's fun to make fun of Bloomberg, and if your economic model says there's a 100% chance of anything, then you're probably doing it wrong. But the bottom line is the economy over the last 12 months has been remarkably resilient and has exhibited quite strong growth, especially with our most recent GDP number that came out last week of 4.9% U.S. economic growth in the third quarter. So why have things sort of gone differently? Well, I want to provide a little perspective about kind of where we are. If you go back to 2019 and look at some of the economic forecasts, whether it's by the OECD or the Congressional Budget Office, and they were forecasting where GDP would be in 2023 as they need to do for budgeting and projection purposes, we are actually at a higher output than we were forecast to be 4 years ago. we're better off in our situation than we were forecast to be before the pandemic. We have completely made up the ground that we lost during the pandemic, which is a pretty remarkable accomplishment if you thought where we were, 2 or 3 years ago. And this has not come completely without cost. We know that there is significant inflation in the market that is getting better. It's getting under control, but it's still higher than where it should be. We have a debt and a deficit that are higher than where they might have otherwise been. But having said that, our economy is remarkable right now, and it seems like that is going to continue. So we think that the coming year is going to have modest economic growth of around 1.8 to 2% in GDP. We see our strong labor market continuing, and the labor market has really been quite phenomenal. There have been two factors that have happened over the last year. One is that unemployment has actually ticked up a little bit, which is kind of a good thing. A year ago, we were hearing a lot of stories about how difficult it was to hire, right? All these businesses were talking about the labor shortage and they can't grow. Unemployment has actually gone up. In the meantime, jobs have been added. And the only way that works is we've actually added 3.3 million workers to the labor force over the last year. So some of the people who are sitting on the sidelines have actually come and gotten back into the labor force and are working once again. So our labor force participation has increased significantly over the last year. All of these are indicative of an economy that is really performing quite well, and maybe a little bit different than what it seems like we hear in the headlines. Most of the headlines that I've seen have attributed the strong economic performance to some combination of Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. I'm not quite completely convinced that that's what it is, although maybe there's a little something to it, because what is driving our economic growth over the last year is the consumer spending. So regardless of increasing interest rates, mortgage rates going up, some doom and gloom that we're hearing in the economy, U.S. households continue to spend. And 70% of our economic output is driven by consumer spending. And we're a little cautious that there are signs that may not continue. One of the signs we look at is where are household savings. And household savings are continuing to decline. Consumers, households are feeling good to the point where they're spending more and depleting their savings, which is okay. It's good from an economic activity. If we have a business, we want people, out there spending, but that's probably unsustainable. So when we look forward, we think at some time the consumer is going to pull back a little bit and our economic growth is going to slow. And part of that is going to be driven largely by interest rates. We're all very aware that mortgage rates are at a very different place than they were a year ago. We're seeing signs that the housing economy, the housing market is slowing down quite a bit. And the housing market, in addition to being key in its own right, it also drives a lot of other purchases. When people buy houses, then they also buy large durable goods, washers and dryers, and all that kind of stuff that goes along with it. So we're expecting some pullback in that area, although we're a lot more sort of optimistic than we were last year, which might be its own sort of danger sign. So what do we expect for 2024? Again, economic growth will be around 1.5 to 2%. The labor market will probably slow down a little bit, which means that unemployment should creep up from about 3.7, 3.8% to slightly over 4%. Not necessarily a bad sign, because it's still a low unemployment number. Most people who want jobs can get them. And all of that slowdown will actually probably be a good thing in terms of our inflation rates and bringing that down to more historic levels and levels that the Fed wants to see. There are, of course, always risks, and the risks, whether they be global in nature, obviously conflict in Ukraine and Israel, probably directly won't have a huge impact on the U.S. economy, but they can certainly have impact on energy prices is probably the area we would see them most directly. But other uncertainty always poses risks there. But there's a number of other things. An election year coming up and our sort of dysfunctional Washington situation right now does not help the U.S. economy. And the biggest risk, I think, with that is if things were starting to turn bad, if something else were to happen, the ability of our federal government to respond quickly and effectively to that is probably fairly low right now and would probably be worse given that we have an election year coming up next. So all things, we should exercise some caution. Don't necessarily expect 2024 to be as good as 2023 seems to be turning out, but we do see the positive signs in the economy and do expect continued growth. So with that, I'll turn it over to Russell to talk about the financial markets.
Sure. My role is to talk about the U.S. financial markets. Some of the things that Kyle just touched on, I'll touch on as well. But then I'll tell you whether or not you're supposed to buy stocks. That's probably why half you are here. Last year, we had 4 factors that we were focusing in on just in the impact on the financial markets. We were right with these factors, but boy, did we miss the mark with the stock market. Much to the pleasure of a lot of people because it outperformed what we expected. We were expecting the Fed to slow their pace of raising rates. We fell a little bit short on that. We felt like we were going to see 50 to 75 basis point increase. We got 100 basis points this year. Yesterday, we got no hike. Nothing like writing a preview for next year that was due yesterday when there's a Fed meeting. Inflation has slowed. You don't hear people say this very often, but the Fed has done a good job as far as taking care of inflation so far, and I'll get to that. We do have the tight labor force. I love anecdotal stuff. I have a friend who, let's just say, is between jobs in Chicago right now, where I actually live. Uber and DoorDash are not hiring. They have too many people working for them right now, which I just found that absolutely shocking. They're like, well, I'll make a little bit of money and maybe I'll have some fun stories being an Uber driver. Can't even get a job as an Uber driver right now. So, and it's the unskilled end where it's really tight with the strikes that we just saw with more skilled workers where they got nice pay raises. There's almost a bifurcation in the labor force right now. And then landmines, we were expecting, we talked a lot about Ukraine this time last year. It seems like that is on the back burner now. The Israel conflict, the interesting thing with respect to the Israel conflict, oil is lower than where it was in September, even though October saw that situation emerge. And that started on a Saturday. The U.S. stock market, the S&P 500 was up the first session after the Israel situation, which it doesn't seem that the financial markets care too much about that. As I noted, we expected maybe flat to less than average stock market returns. NASDAQ 100's up over 30%. If you're going to be wrong, that's how you want to be wrong. S&P 500's up about 10%. My favorite index, the Russell 2000, is down 5% this year. And this is the widest divergence between the S&P 500, which is large cap stocks, and the Russell 2000, which is small cap stocks, since like 98. And typically, you can read into that S&P 500 companies, if you think of them as a single entity, well more than half of their business comes from outside the U.S., so it's almost more of an international index, whereas the Russell 2000 is kind of a domestic index where a big portion of Russell 2000 companies' business comes from inside the U.S. So it's just interesting when you see our economy appearing to outperform most of the world, that the stock market index that you would expect to benefit from that has not. Bonds had a terrible 2022. A lot of people were starting to talk about whether or not the 60-40 portfolio, and when you hear people say that, they're talking about stock and bond diversification. About once every 20 years, we have a year where both stocks and bonds go down together. So I don't necessarily agree with diversification is dead. It just took a break in 2022. Investment grade bonds this year are down slightly, but high yield bonds are up about 6% or so. Looking forward, we always have positive and negative fundamentals. And the positive fundamentals, and these are in order of importance. If these start to fall apart, we're going to have a very difficult time having positive stock returns in 2024. Lower interest rates, our model still says there's a little possibility for a recession in 2024. There's definitely a good chance of slowing economic activity, which Kyle just touched on. Right now, the odds that if you can take the derivative markets and you can, much like you can price in the odds of, Indiana winning the NCAA championship, you can
100%.
price in, do what?
100%?
100%, yeah, that
all
according
in.
to a couple of people. But you can use the derivative markets as opposed to asking a bunch of economist questions to get a forecast. And right now, the derivative markets say the next Fed move is a cut. And before the meeting yesterday, they were saying the first cut would be in July. Now it looks like it might be in June. And the stock market was up yesterday. It's up again this morning after those announcements. The stock market is very fixated on when's the Fed going to start cutting. And if it ever appears it's going to happen sooner than the market had been pricing in, stock prices start to rise. If it looks like that number starts to get pushed out farther, then I would be very concerned for stocks, especially in the first half of 2024. We should see the yield curve normalize. One of the factors that Bloomberg took into account when they were doing the 100% we're going to have a recession is the yield curve being inverted. It has been inverted for some time now. The thing with respect to the yield curve in recessions, every recession was preceded by an inverted yield curve. Every inverted yield curve was not followed by a recession. Make sure I said that right. So it is possible that we don't have to have a recession and we can recover with the yield curve. I like to look at the 2-year versus the 10-year yield. Back in July, the 2-year yield was 100 basis points higher than the 10-year yield. That's about 15 basis points now. We all have different market indicators we love. Mine is the CBOE VIX, the volatility index. Last year, one of the reasons we were somewhat cautious about stocks was VIX was a bit elevated going into 2023. It hit a post-COVID low back in September, and that's been in conjunction with U.S. stocks doing particularly well. Right now, VIX, breaking down all the different components of VIX, it looks like there's concern in the first half of 2024 and then maybe less concern for the second half. And then finally, it is an election year. Normally, stocks do well in election years. Going back to 1980, the only two down years for election years were the year was 2000, which was the internet bubble, and in 2008, which was the great financial crisis. But typically during election years, stocks go up, but I can't really remember the last typical election year in some time. It seems politics have, maybe I'm just getting older, but politics have definitely changed on us. The negative fundamentals, we do have slower economic activity. As we mentioned, GDP growth is going to slow in 2024. This will sound a little silly at first. 2023 stock market performance as a negative for the stock market in 2024. I think a big portion of the strong 2023 for U.S. stocks is investors trying to get ahead of when the Fed's going to start cutting rates, and they were just very early. Anything that changes with rate policy could be negative for stocks because, for lack of a better way to put it, they are discounting the best of all worlds. Consumer spending, I know it's been very, very strong. As Kyle mentioned, we're 70% of consumer economy. If the consumer has been carrying us along, 2024 is going to become a more difficult time for them. It was mentioned I got a PhD. I just finished it. I have student loans. That is impacting the Rhodes household as we have to start making student loan payments again. Delinquency rates for both mortgages and auto loans are already approaching great financial crisis levels. And a number that I did not even know it existed, I think, when I was in college, the U.S. credit card debt topped $1 trillion for the first time recently. I don't know what comes after after a trillion now, but back then I didn't know what came after a billion. So we're predicting our outlook is that stocks should be flat to slightly higher in 2024, probably lagging the long-term average. A lot of that forecast is not negatives with the U.S., but just more a good portion of expected good news in 2024 is already priced into the market. The market forecast right now, using those derivative odds that I was talking about for the target rate, is expecting a target rate for the FOMC to be 4.5% by the end of 2020. By the end of 2024, I think that might be a bit aggressive. I usually don't like to go contrary to what the markets are saying. The market's right more often than it's wrong, but I feel like any hiccups with respect to the markets, and one factor that we didn't put in the negatives because it's pretty difficult to quantify right now, there's a really good chance that we're going to get a second round of inflation. You had a couple of successful strikes where skilled workers are getting paid a lot more. We have some supply chain issues that still need to be worked out. So if we do start to see inflationary pressures again, and we start to see the odds that the FOMC is not going to be able to cut, or maybe even they're going to have to raise rates again, which is something they would have to do in response to inflation, that would have a pretty negative impact on stocks. So cautiously optimistic, but aware that a couple of shoes dropping and we might be in some trouble in 2024. So be more positive than me.
I'll try, Russell. That's a hard act to follow. Just a tip, because we are in a fantastic learning institution. After a trillion is a quadrillion.
Okay.
So just
I hope debt never reaches that in my life or their lifetime. Okay.
yes. Let's hope not. Let's hope your student debt doesn't reach that level. Chancellor, congratulations. It's interesting. We have a number of Chicago connections. Russell, your permanent home is in Chicago. I was born on the south side of Chicago.
Go White Sox.
Okay, I got to tell you a story, though. My grandmother was a Cubs fan, and she converted me from day one. She and I were Cubs fans. Everybody else was White Sox. So what can I say? I stopped watching the White Sox when they quit calling it Comiskey Park. So that tells you something there. But I'm a proud Hoosier transplant. I went to Purdue University as an undergrad. I went to IU for graduate school. I've lived in Indiana the vast majority of my life, and it's been fascinating in my work at the center to see how the state and its regions and its cities and towns has evolved over the past 20 and 30 years. There was a period of time, kind of early in my career, when everybody was saying that manufacturing is dead. They called the Midwest the Rust Belt, if anybody remembers that. There was huge negativity about manufacturing, and not all of it unwarranted, because so much manufacturing was moving down to Mexico, up to Canada, and then eventually overseas and into Asia. So we've seen that happen, but now things are turning around. We're seeing outsourcing of manufacturing turn into reshoring. And over the past several years, that has been very good for Indiana because we maintain that strength in manufacturing. We are really good at producing goods, shipping goods. You know, we're known as the crossroads of America. I was really heartened driving here at 6 in the morning on I-70, and the rest area was overflowing with semi-trucks. I mean, there must have been 300 of them. I have a habit of counting, counting things. And it was really heartening to me because it does show that our goods production industries in Indiana have really been thriving. Now, goods production, though, doesn't employ the vast majority of people. It's actually services providers who employ most people in Indiana. But in 2022, we went over the 700,000 mark in the number of jobs in goods production. And that was a point, a tipping point for us. And we've seen over this past year any number of announcements of new manufacturing coming into the state, seeing existing manufacturers. You know, you've seen a lot of stuff going on in Kokomo, right? I wish it was Richmond and Connorsville, but I think eventually we're going to see a lot more auto parts makers locating in this part of the state to serve Ohio plants as well as Indiana plants. We anticipated last year, actually, that we were going to lose 60,000 jobs in manufacturing. We were wrong. Now, we didn't predict as heavily on the recession side, and I actually recall telling people at Outlooks last year that I didn't see us going into a recession in Indiana, in part because consumption across the country was so strong. And Kyle, you mentioned that, you know, and everybody's looking at the consumer sentiment index that comes out of the University of Michigan. When we stop buying, that's a trigger to me as much as the yield curve. Because so much of what our American economy relies on is our insatiable desire for stuff. Now, I will encourage you to go out and buy a lot of stuff this Christmas. Let's see if Richmond can individually move up your consumer confidence index here in the region. Some of the things that we see happening will be a slowdown in hiring, even at the same time that Indiana has seen a remarkable turn in people coming back to the labor force. And where we're seeing it most particularly is in the age 25 to 44 age range. I call that the prime household formation age. Kyle, you mentioned that earlier. You know, people who are starting to form families, they're out of college, hopefully they're not overburdened by college debt, and they buy the big stuff, the washers, the dryers. People are buying outdoor kitchens. It's amazing the kinds of things that we've been doing to our homes since the pandemic. We expect, though, in Indiana that consumption is going to start to slow. We're going to see wage growth be tempered. Even at the same time, we see personal income grow to about 2% over 24, 25, and 26. So we see growth in personal income. Some of that's going to come from dividends, rent, and interest, as much as it will come from earnings. But we are going to see a slowdown in wages, even though the UAW did strike those tentative agreements, because they haven't voted. The members haven't voted on it yet. Those agreements were remarkably successful. I was actually surprised that the strikes ended after 6 weeks. I thought it was going to go 2-3 months. But the new leadership at the UAW took a really interesting tack. they didn't do the same-o. And already, I heard on the news this morning that Toyota USA has raised wages over the next 4 years. They're going to raise wages, I think they said, by 9%, 8 or 9%. So it's already affecting non-unionized wages, and that's going to take effect in Indiana. We see Honda and Subaru probably following the same thing because they're going to be competing for the same labor force. Now, what are some of the threats that we face in Indiana? Always natural, weather, tornadoes, floods, certainly things that are being caused by climate change. It was a particularly hot summer. I don't know about you, but based on this week's weather, I think we're going to have a really cold winter. But that just may be me. I think one of the threats, though, that we need to be most worried about, and Chancellor, I'm going to talk to you particularly, is that there's going to be brutal competition from Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, Illinois for our best and brightest, some of whom are in this room. We want to be able to keep your graduates in Indiana. You want to be able to keep them here in Richmond or in the East Central region or Central Indiana. We want you to stay here in Indiana and get those good jobs here. But as our workforce is aging, and we have a large number of baby boomers moving into their late 60s, 70s, there are a lot of people that are going to need to be replaced at their jobs. And we don't have enough replacement workers right now for that. So we're going to have to compete with Ohio and Illinois. We need to get the headhunters out. And we also need to get the message out there that people can have good jobs in Indiana. Some of the strengths that we've had, I've already talked about in terms of consumption and a much stronger labor force. Our age 25 to 44 labor force participation is at 83%. Now, typically, you're going to hear people talk about the 16 plus labor force. Think about it, 16 plus, how many people 16 to 18 are in the labor force? We don't have as many teenagers working nowadays. And it also takes into account the elderly. If you look at the 25 to 44 age group, labor force participation at 83% is very strong. What we have to do, though, is make sure that we keep growing the number of those 25 to 44-year-olds. So all of you on social media need to start touting the joys of Indiana, why it's a great place to live, why we're close to everything. Louisville, Chicago, St. Louis, Detroit, easy drive. Within 500 miles, we are close to 75 million people within 500 miles of where we are right now. So we're close to a lot of really great stuff. We need to tell that story. What are some of the weaknesses that could drive our growth down next year? It could be the continuation that we don't have enough people with associate's or bachelor's degrees. We need to get people to go back to school. There are a lot of Hoosiers that have some college, but they haven't completed that associate's degree or that bachelor's degree. Let's figure out how to get them back. The governor's workforce cabinet is trying to come up with ideas and incentives to do that. And I'm going to hurry up, Boylana, I promise. The other thing that we have to worry about is something that I call negative attractiveness. And I was brought up in a family where you never boasted. I can remember my grandmother's admonition to my mother, quit complimenting Carol, she's going to get a big head. And I was actually born with a big head, so, you know, it's a little humiliating to hear that. My mother told me about my big head from the day of birth. But Hoosiers have this humility, this humbleness about them that we hesitate often to really tout what the wonderful strengths of Indiana are. And we need to get over that. And I think we also need to really focus on welcoming people here who are different than us. That it's okay if they're moving here from California, because a lot of people want to leave California. Let's not look down on Californians who want to move here. Let's be accepting to people who may want to move here from New Jersey or New York. And let's think about the fact that we need new blood. We need new people here. We can't do it just by having lots of babies. And the bad news is our birth rate has plummeted. So we're not replacing ourselves fast enough. So I gave you the good news first, and I ended with a little bit of bad news, but great segue to Dr. Professor to talk about Richmond.
Thank you, Carol. Usually, when it comes to my part, I will review with you some numbers of the region, and I hope you don't find boring.
Orlin, could you use the microphone?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. And in my review, this presentation will cover the Richmond region, which includes the counties in the East Central Indiana, including Fayette, Franklin, Henry, Randolph, Rush, Union, and Wayne. If you cannot see part of the slide, I already have a pink copy in the packet for you, so you can refer to the PowerPoint slide copies. The average January to August monthly labor force of the region grew by 0.5% to 96,584 people in 2023 compared to the year before. The average of Henry County, 22,301 people, and Wayne County, 29,890 people, remained about the same between the 2 years. While Rush County, Franklin County, Union County, and Randolph County grew their averages between 0.75% and 2.57%. Fayette County's average declined by 1.2%. Over the same 8 months in 2023, the overall average monthly unemployment rate for the region was 3.56%, up by 0.35% from the year before. Whereas Rush County had the lowest average rate of 2.91%, and Fayette County experienced the highest rate of 4.6%. The rest of the region ranged between 3.1% and 3.7%. Except for Fayette County, all the other counties had slightly higher average unemployment rates in 2023 than the previous year. $307 net new jobs were successfully created in the private sectors of the region in the first quarter of 2023. When compared with the year before, resulting from the additions of more than 100 jobs from industries such as manufacturing, construction, educational services, and healthcare and social services. The additions of 2 to 39 jobs from industries including transportation and warehousing, mining, finance and insurance, and management of companies and enterprises. A substantial elimination of 802 jobs from accommodation and food services, and the elimination of 100 jobs or fewer from industries, including retail trade, utilities, wholesale trade, information, real estate and rental and leasing, professional, scientific and technical, administrative support, waste management and remediation, arts, entertainment and recreation and other services. The region saw an average increase of 10.7% in the private sector's weekly wages, again in the first quarter of 2023. Unlike the mining industry, which suffered from a decline of 17.7%, all the other industries in the region recorded a rise in their weekly wages from 1.8% as in the agriculture, forestry, fishing, and mining industry, to 25.6% as in the arts, entertainment, and recreation industry. Over the 2023's first 8 months, except for Yulian County, the housing markets in all the other counties in the region saw a decline in new listings, with the highest decline in Randolph County, minus 39.8%, and the lowest in Wayne County, minus 5.4%. A decline in closed sales, again, with the highest decline in Randolph County, minus 35.6%, and the lowest in Wayne County, minus 8%. And a rise in the median sales price, with the highest rise in Franklin County, plus 13.2%, and the lowest in the Fayette County, plus 0.6%. Again, unlike Yulian County, home sellers in all the other counties received a lower percentage of their original list price in 2023 than in 2022. The greatest drop occurred in Rush County, minus 5.8%, while the smallest one happened in Franklin County, minus 0.9%. Inventory went the fastest in Randolph County, with the closed sales to new listings ratio of 96.3%. On the other hand, Yulian County's closed sales to new listings ratio of 57.1% in the case that the county had the slowest selling housing market in the region. The IUE's Regional Business Confidence Index and its sub-indexes continue to decline this year compared to last year. The decline of the composite index by 2.4% this year can be attributed to the declines of its present situation sub-index by 5% and expectation sub-index by 0.5%. These suggest that businesses in the region had again gone through a more challenging year in 2023 compared to 2022. On the other hand, the businesses still have about the same expectations for 2024 as they had for 2023 a year ago. From the annual business survey conducted on the region by the IUE's Business and Economic Research Center in the past September and October, while 1/5 of the surveyed businesses in the region maintained their production business activities in 2023 at about the same level as in 2022. More than half of them had increased these slightly by less than 5% or significantly by more than 5%. Most businesses kept or expanded their employment in 2023. Only about 1/10 of them shrank their capital investments. On the other hand, over 90% of the businesses experienced a rise in their business courses. Despite the challenging year, about 2/5 of the business managed to increase their profitability, whereas about a quarter preserved their profitability at the 2022 level. Upon planning for their 2024 operations, nearly 90% of the surveyed businesses expected to increase or maintain their 2023 level of production business activities, while 2/3 of the business anticipated maintaining their 2023 employment level. 4% planned to reduce their employees, and 3/10 anticipated hiring more employees. More than 90% of the surveyed businesses planned on maintaining or increasing their capital investment in 2024. Of the businesses surveyed, 42.6% expected an increase in profitability, despite 81.7% of the survey participants anticipated an increase in business courses. About 1/3 of the surveyed businesses anticipated the same business and economic conditions in 2024 as in 2023. Over 2/5 were optimistic, while more than 1/4 were pessimistic about the 2024 conditions. Taking into consideration that the U.S. inflation is still higher than the Fed's long-run target of 2%, the global supply chain disruptions are still hanging there, caused by the two ongoing wars, the Ukraine-Russia war and the Israel-Hamas war, and other factors. And the labor force's post-pandemic adjustment to jobs requiring physical presence at the workplace, businesses in the region continue facing some hardships in their operations. As a result, we project that the unemployment rate for the region will be around 3% through 2024, with some variations across industry sectors. This is all my report, and if you have any question, feel free to ask us. welcome the other panelists back to the stage.
Are there any questions from the group? We'd love to hear what's on your mind about the economy or anything. I think we've got just a few minutes.
I have a question for Russell and one for Carol.
Uh-oh.
My first question is, what are the I'm a supply chain is my area of expertise. What are the supply chain issues that you see impacting the economy that you referred to? And my question for Carol is, why do you think we see this return of people to the workforce?
I was taking too much time, and I skipped one of my big negatives, which was China. And the supply chain issues really revolve around companies quietly, because they don't want to upset the Chinese government right now, moving, I think Apple's a perfect example. The next iPhone, there's a good chance it's going to be made in India as opposed to made in China. So that's probably the biggest supply chain issue. I would say in my mind, and it's not my area of expertise at all, it's going to be a transitional thing where hopefully some of the manufacturing we do in China works its way to Mexico, where higher end things, such as semiconductors, we're trying to repatriate that ability here. But again, it takes a while to put one of those fabs up. So it's more of a transitional supply chain thing than some sort of permanent disruption. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
You and I, you can correct me in front of everybody if you want. I'm used to it. Okay.
No, I actually see our extreme weather as being one of the disruptors of moving product.
You can see that as well, and just the geopolitical situation.
In your second question, you got two in there. Good for you. About why are people moving back to the labor force. We have definitely seen, there were a lot of articles over the past 16 months about millions of men missing from the labor force. There were also a lot of publicity around women not being able to come back to the labor force, in particular around childcare. Now, I would argue that the childcare issue was really impacting both men and women. There have been substantial changes among the younger generations about who's going to stay home with the kids. And we certainly saw this during the pandemic, and some of the research we've done on Indiana showed that there were some remarkable differences in who was staying home. And often in rural areas in Indiana, it was men who were staying home with the children and the women were working. Now, part of that was because of the nature of the work that the women were doing in the hospitality. They were public-facing jobs. What we've seen nationally, we haven't studied this for the state yet, but what we've seen nationally is that more people are moving back to payroll employment. What I mean by that is they're working for employers who have, more than 3 employees. They're moving back in part because of benefits packages. With the student loan pause that had happened and the disappointment that many students had with the Supreme Court decision about forgiveness, we've seen student loan payments begin again, sadly, Russell. So, although I don't think you would have been forgiven.
No.
But not because of you personally, but because of the timing. So we've seen more women return to the labor force. We've seen younger people coming back. And we anticipate that a lot of young people had stepped out of the labor force to pursue non-compensated work. My son was one of them. He was going to try a music career as part of a band. And he learned, we didn't tell him what was going to happen. We let him figure out what was going to happen. It's really hard to make a living as a musician. People love it, but they don't always want to pay for it unless you're Taylor Swift.
Thank you.
Don't be bashful.
Thank you guys for being here today. We greatly appreciate that. Question for Russell. Post-pandemic, the Dow Jones was trading up over 36,000 volume. It popped up a little bit over 33 yesterday. Do you see it getting back to post-pandemic levels?
If everything hits on all cylinders, I could see us putting up a new all-time high later in 2024. But this was the first year that I wrote the Financial Market Outlook by myself, so all of it's my opinion. And I think maybe the reason I wrote it by myself was the other two people looked at 2024 and said, I'm not even going to try to guess what's going to happen next year. No, it seems like there's 1 year a decade where it's very difficult to look forward. But when I put it together, and I started doing my pro-con list, which I guess would be the positives, negatives list, it was real easy to come up with a lot of negatives for next year. And the positives, I feel like, are mostly already priced in. If everything works in the best of all worlds, I could see us making a new high in 2024, but I would not put money on it. I don't know if that helps or not. Or
Maybe 2025, maybe? Get up there?
yeah, I think by 2025, because my opinion differs from the market right now. I think the cuts are going to come later, and the stock market's going to languish around. But once we do start getting into a cycle where they're cutting rates, that'll bump stocks up to closer to all-time highs.
This is probably for Carol. With the READY funding coming through from the state, also potential Lilly money, also some of the HELP money, there's a lot of conversation locally about how that funding can be a real stimulus for this region. I'm just curious how much of that has weighed into anything that you're thinking about from a state level, from economic development.
That's a really good question, and my answer would be yes, it is weighing into our anticipation for 2024. The state of Indiana, with its READY 2.0 now, this new round, $500 million in these READY grants. Your region has applied for the READY grant, and I think it's a wonderful opportunity. And I'm really pleased to see the state take some of that surplus money and put it to work. We do need to invest in our people. And I have been really thrilled by the fact that Indiana University, and I would say this whether I worked at IU or not, is also investing in the state of Indiana. They're investing in life sciences in the central Indiana region. They're investing in southwest Indiana around Crane, the Naval Warfare Center. And I think that investment there is around $111 million. The one in the central Indiana region is do you guys remember? I think it's 200 or 300 million.
I thought it was 250.
250.
Yeah.
So, we're getting close to almost that $500 million that the state's investing. I would encourage you to talk to Pam Whitten and get them to free up some more of that endowment money to invest in this region, because I think you are in a very sweet spot location-wise and the type of labor that you have available here. Part of it's going to depend really on the people of Richmond and this region to really make a standout vision for what you want it to be over the next 10, 20, 30 years. We're really starved for vision, I think. And the regions that are going to wind up winning, if you will, are going to be the ones that are thinking further ahead and really planning for the next generation.
Thank you for being here today. My question's for Kyle. Do you think there's a correlation between the infusion of cash at the federal level with the current GDP rates that we're seeing?
In terms of, is the federal government been stimulating our economic growth?
Yes, that's the basis of the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly an element to it, right? Government spending is an important sort of, can be a driver. Although, I think having said that, we sort of envisioned that the fiscal stimulus has been pulling back over the last year. And so we're seeing some of the things like the CHIPS Act and some of these investment projects will certainly help drive some growth. But we kind of thought that that fiscal spending would be a negative this year. It really hasn't been too much of one, but we're not seeing a lot of increased spending. So that's not really what's driving our economic growth right now. I think it'll be interesting with the potential for a government shutdown and how that plays into 2024. And I do sort of factor that into our growth going forward as part of our projection that GDP will be lower next year than it is this year is due to a little bit of reduced government spending. One key thing to keep in mind is not all government spending is federal. A lot of what we're hearing about, and even as Carol talks about, a lot of state and municipal spending, partly due to our good economy and budgets, state budgets being pretty good, are helping keep some of that growth going. So I think it's a factor, but it's not necessarily a negative, if you will.
Well, and if I could just follow up on your question with you, Kyle. One thing is that number, that 4.9%, that was, I think, startling. It can be revised down.
Certainly.
So do you think they will revise it down?
I mean, I think it certainly is subject to revision. The GDP, the first GDP number that comes out is called the advance estimate. So there's a lot of obviously data calculation and trying to figure out what happens. Typically, I mean, I think it's potential it could be revised down. It's possible it could be revised up. We'll see what the numbers bear out. I think that regardless, the sentiment that the economy is quite strong right now is probably going to hold up regardless of revision.
Well, my question will have to do with real estate. We've seen a lot of people moving into our community because of the affordability. With both spouses, working at home, needing home offices. We've had, but there's still, as Oylin, a lot of housing shortage. What's your prediction on that? How do we get over that part? And also, the housing shortage, what about with all these people working at home? I mean, how's that, the commercial market? I mean, we're going to have as in Richmond, I think they're working hard to solve those empty building problems. But, I mean, in larger communities, I mean, we're just going to have so much vacant buildings and those type of things. But I guess the housing shortage, is there any kind of input on that and how that's going to be addressed through?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure from a policy perspective, certainly rising interest rates are going to exacerbate that problem, right? It's much more challenging to invest in residential construction now when the builders have to pay a lot more money to borrow to build that construction, and knowing that a homeowner is going to have to pay a 7% mortgage is a very different environment than we were in certainly 2 years ago. and I don't think we've sort of felt the full brunt of that. One of the startling, I guess, projections or concerns that came out of our model is that mortgage rates are going to stay high. We're forecasting them to stay over 7% for the next year and over 6% for the next several years. So it's kind of my sort of knee-jerk reaction when we see mortgage rates go from 3% to 7%, like, oh, well, they'll probably just turn right back and go right back down. But as Russell indicated, I mean, we're a ways away from Fed cuts and corresponding. So I think we're going to continue to struggle to get that new residential construction that would alleviate some of these shortages.
And you're seeing a conversion. Maybe not as much in a place like Richmond, but if any of you have ever been to the Water Tower Mall in Chicago, the top 4 floors are going to be converted to probably residential.
Sweet.
Yeah. No,
Are
and
you gonna buy one?
I'm sure it'll be very affordable.
If anything, I'm headed. I'll become a Hoosier before you know it.
Okay. All right.
I have teenage daughters that won't let me leave Chicago yet. That- You're going to see just a conversion of freestanding. I mean, I lived in a loft once that used to be a shoe factory. And so I do think that empty spaces that are convertible that anywhere will probably become housing, because that's a quicker way to go about getting it. It's probably a cheaper way to do it as well.
And it's a great sign of a vibrant economy, right? Like, our work habits change. Hopefully our infrastructure follows along with that. And people want to live in downtown areas. I think there's some, driving of maybe being at the city center and being able to walk to things can make for attractive amenities.
Another possibility may be for the large houses, maybe if possible, they make it as a multi-family units so that it can house more people there.
Yes, of course.
That's your
It's good to
That's
be the king.
privilege. Yes.
So we have a lot of talent here today. Melissa Vance from the Chamber, Mike Gaddis, Bank, Wayne Bank, of course, Jason from Reed Health. You mentioned, Carol, how you want to retain talent here. And you also mentioned how diverse organizations are more profitable and are better for the community and so on. Growing up in Chicago, and my fellow Chicagoans, corporations are fleeing cities, San Francisco, New York. They're looking for places just like you described. We have these major highways here, right? And they're being expanded, 70, 65. The location, low crime, lower taxes. What are we doing to attract these businesses that are fleeing these major cities? All we need is one fulfillment center would change the culture overnight. So there are more resources to invest in improving our education attainment in this state, for example. So what are some of the things that are happening to do just that?
Happening here,
Yes, and we have lots of experts in the room too.
and they should.
So should I bring the mic up?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what should be happening, and let's put the pressure on the politicians here.
Don't get me in trouble this week, please.
But before COVID, I went to a financial. I used to work for one of the financial exchanges in Chicago, which will probably move to Texas because of taxes, believe it or not. But I was at a derivative conference in Miami, and the mayor of Miami was walking around and saying, how many people work with? Have you ever thought about relocating to Florida? And now Miami's been referred to as Wall Street South, and everybody says that it's because everybody moved during COVID. That was a trend that was in place beforehand, and it was the city of Miami offering incentives. We got better weather, much lower taxes than New York, et cetera. But they're the ones that I mean, they should be at manufacturing conferences. We would love to bring you, we would love to bring you to Indiana, and here are some incentives that we have for you. And that's why companies move around. States do compete, for better or worse.
And I would add, I mean, one of the challenges I think that we're facing in Indiana is the higher education attainments are going the wrong direction. And so when you look at the talent we are drawing here, or the businesses we're drawing here, especially sort of around central Indiana, a lot of it is warehousing and distribution, and we have people that are moving boxes around. And yes, I understand a fulfillment center is valuable, but if we want higher wage jobs, we also need to drive our economy toward, we need a more educated workforce and be able to attract those businesses that are going to provide skilled jobs at higher wages. So I don't think it's kind of good enough to stand back and say, well, unemployment's low in Indiana. Yes, but like they may not be the types of jobs that we want. And it starts, I mean, we're all, and I know like we're probably preaching to the choir here with our, a lot of us are in higher education. And so there's a bias here. Yes, we'd like more students, but the number of 18-year-olds going to college of any type in Indiana right now is declining dramatically. And that's a trend that needs to reverse, or we're not going to draw the kinds of businesses from other states.
Well, and if I could just mention one quick thing before we do go to some of the local expertise. I was really impressed. I got here early this morning, and when I came in to the hall, I saw the faculty and student scholar display. And I started reading it, because at first I hadn't seen anything like that before. Presented in such a beautiful way with people's pictures. And I was trying to understand what it was, and it dawned on me after I read 2 or 3 of the profiles that this was the research that both faculty and students here at IU East are doing. And it was interesting. I was reading the titles of these things, and I was captivated by it. And it's not something I would bump into on Google, I don't think. But that's something that I think all Ivy Tech, IU, Purdue, we really could help people understand why we need to change our mindset about education from being boring to, hey, this is really cool and interesting, and look at what your faculty and students are doing, and get that message out through businesses. Reed Hospital certainly, I'm sure, knows some of these faculty, right? Because some of these papers were wrapped around nursing, medical care, things like that. But I wonder how many other businesses understand what you all are studying.
I think another way that we can retain talent is try to create some more opportunities for them. Because even if they have the talents, their talents are not seen by others, that won't do them very much. For example, we can, as a community, we can try to create some kind of contest or things like that, so that it will give more opportunities for the young people to earn their credentials. So when they become more known, they may be able to grasp better opportunities in their career.
Very interesting, thank you. This concludes this year's Futurecast. I'd like to acknowledge the sponsors of this event. Indiana University East School of Business and Economics, the IU East Business and Economic Research Center, the IU Kelley School of Business, and the East Region chapter of the IU Alumni Association. I'd like to express our thanks to the panelists for sharing such insightful information, and I'd also like to thank each of you for attending and spending your morning on our campus. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.